Here we go. Well, here we are again. So I think last time I made a podcast was already a few months ago, and today I have a pretty important guest. at least we have been talking about this for quite a long time, so it gotta be important. It's really I'm kidding. So today I have Candace Lightner, who is pretty important indeed, not just because of the fact that we are doing a podcast, but more important because of the work she has done in the United States and in general with the foundations and the work in the activism. So, Candice, very much thank you for accepting talking to me. It's really a great pleasure.
It's my pleasure too. Thank you for having me.
So, when I was telling the story, when I heard about you, I must admit I was not I did not know you for a long time, and that's obviously for multiple reasons. First, to start with, I don't drink alcohol, and so I stay away from a lot of these topics, which is something I learned to be wrong, because you can get impacted by that, irrespective of you drinking or not drinking, right? It's just something I learned by listening to some of your talks, but also because in general, Portugal, where I was born, we are not very good talking about these things, right? We stay away from the real topics, and we focus sometimes too much on these surfacing type of things that don't really make much difference to the world. So I learned about you a few years ago, first time, when I came across MAD in the research I was doing. And then back then, this was interesting. I started learning about how this started, and I will get back to that. But then it just went away. And then a few months ago, when I was doing this project, someone said, "Well, you should bring well, they call you Candy, but you said you're just Candace after 50, right?"
Right. Yeah, Candy was cute up until then.
Yeah. So that you should talk to Candy Lightner, and I said, "You're right." And so I dropped Candace a message via LinkedIn, and she answered right away. And so that's really really cool. And the first thing I would like to ask, and I think it's obvious for people that follow you, why did you start that? And more than the situation itself that happened on 3rd of May, 1980, what I would like to know from you is, do you think you always had this drive to do a change, to do something else outside of a normal job, which is also fine? Or was that really the thing that drove you to do that?
No, that was, as someone said recently, that was my why. I didn't, although my father, it's so funny because I'm putting together 3 master classes right now in conjunction with the Mentora Institute. And in those classes, I'm including some of my own stories. And one of them is the fact that when the press would say to me, "Why you? Why did you start MAD? Why not someone else who's been victimized by this crime?" My dad, if he was around, would pipe up and say, because she was always rebellious, which I was, and she always defied authority. But at the time, I did it as a normal person, I guess, and I never thought that I would go on to be anything more than I was at the time, which was a mother and an ex-wife. And so I think with Carrie's death, the anger was so great because of the circumstances that I just felt so strongly that I had to do something, because I had other children and I didn't want them to die too.
So and this is something, I'm a father too, and so I can't possibly humanly imagine the pain that you went through with your daughter. And one of the curiosities I had with that is, did this work with MAD, and later you have so much work, and currently also with We Save Lives, did this help you to go through this pain, or did this just somehow put it away for a while and you felt it later? What was this journey?
Right. It helped deal with my anger very well, because I was able to channel that into a positive direction that would hold drunk drivers accountable, at which they weren't being held accountable before I started MAD. And so the anger, and I was so, when Carrie was killed, I was so angry, not so much at the driver, even though he was a multiple repeat offender, who was out on bail when he killed my daughter, but at the system, because they continued to allow him to drive. He had a valid California driver's license when he killed her. He'd had 5 prior offenses. And he was still driving legally. And to me, that was just absolutely outrageous. And so I was so angry at the system that my anger was targeted there, as were my early efforts were doing something and changing the system, which I did. The grief of the loss, it did not help with the grief of the loss. It postponed it, as you mentioned earlier. Although people probably think, how can you postpone grief? Trust me, you can. I've written a book called Giving Sorrow Words. How to cope with grief and get on with your life. So, and I'm a grief facilitator, so I think I'm fairly knowledgeable. But I really did, and I had to do that in order to function. I mean, there were times when, yes, I grieved, obviously, and, couldn't make it out of bed and was in so much pain, I just couldn't face the day. But overall, I think for me anyway, it really postponed a lot of it. And when I left MAD, the first thing I did was sign up to see a psychologist to help me with my grief. And I said to her, I hate pain, which I do, of any kind. And I think I've just been avoiding, and I really need to deal with it. And she was incredibly helpful. And so hence I did. And that's where the book comes out. But I want to, because I like talking about grief, although that sounds odd, but I do. But I want to point out that in my studies and research and interviews, I've learned that grief really is a lifetime process. It's a 3-phase process, a beginning, a middle, and the rest of your life. So, yes, I still grieve. I just went through our anniversary, and it was really tough, especially because of COVID and not being able to do what I would normally do, although we found a fairly decent substitute. But yeah, I would say MAD postponed my grief.
Yeah. And so when you created MAD, and so for everyone that's listening, is Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which started by Mothers Against Drunk Drivers and then changed to drunk driving. Right? And so Candace has created or pushed to create this foundation. It's a foundation in 1980.
80.
Yeah. And so this obviously comes as a consequence of the fact that her daughter was killed by a drunk driver on the 3rd of May, 1980. And so for people that do not know the story, I think it's a powerful story to listen, not because of unfortunately what happened to Candace's daughter, but to the fact that she created so much change after that. And you being in the United States, the changing of the system, the changing of the mindset, and I'm not saying that America or United States doesn't have change, but we are talking about the 80s, where there's a complete different generation, a complete different mindset. There's no social media, there's no all this, right? How were the first few months or the first year, the first 2 years? How do you navigate through the fact that you I know that you did not have any political affiliation.
And I'm proud of it.
Yeah,
no, I wasn't even a registered voter. So.
Which means you don't have the lobbies, right?
Right.
That's a lot to do with that.
Right.
How many times, when was the first time you sat in your desk and you said, shit, how do I get this through? Because when you get to that, you get the power, you go to it. But the first time, the first road on your block, the first roadblock, the second, it started pulling you back, right?
Well, I had a strategy, and that was to deal with the problem at the local, state, and national level. And so we immediately, Carrie was killed May 3rd, and I started MAD May 7th, as soon as the man was arrested and I knew what his background was. So, my first thing was to research the issue and see what other people had done or not done and what had worked and not worked. And so I decided this was a local, state, and national problem. So we decided in California that we would ask the governor for a commission, a task force to solve the problem of drunk driving. So that was my first major effort. And we launched a petition drive, and I tried to get in to see the governor, and it was really frustrating because it took a while, and it took me blasting him in major media and front page headlines before I did. But I didn't I never thought that things wouldn't happen because I was so incredibly naive. I mean, as we said, I wasn't a registered voter, although I had to learn how to register to vote. I knew absolutely. I mean, I grew up in the military, so I really knew nothing about the political system. And though I'd been a volunteer for the Red Cross, and I was a drug counselor and had started a drug counseling program for heroin addicted GIs coming out of Vietnam. This was in Okinawa. I mean, I really never had started a movement or done anything political or knew what a bill was or legislation or any of that. So I think because of my naivete, I didn't have any expectations. As I do now. Starting We Save Lives was harder in that respect, but I just sort of moved forward. If this is what I wanted to get done, then this is what I was going to do. And I just needed to figure out how to do it and where to do it and why to do it and whatever. And I did it. And so I don't remember, even when I couldn't get in to see the governor, and it was really becoming a big issue and a big media issue, it never occurred to me that I eventually wouldn't get in and I eventually wouldn't get my task force. Because to me, it was the right thing to do. And I think as long as you think you're in the right, you know, it's the right thing to do. You just continue to move forward. And to me, everything I felt I was doing was the right thing to do. And I just knew eventually other people would see that too. So,
over time and there are a lot of things that you have accomplished with MAD and also later on in the causes. And of course, one of the reasons I came across was because of the minimum age for alcohol drinking is 21 years old. And so I came across because that's the most famous one. We always make jokes in Portugal because of that, because in Portugal it's 18. And we used to make jokes when I was younger than my friends because they used to say, if you go to the United States, you cannot even drink alcohol. And so I learned about it. But do you feel, and did you feel in that time, because not everyone likes to complain, but anyway, we all like to criticize. We always like to try to find ghosts and reasons behind good causes. But did you feel support from communities and from people around? And do you feel still now over such amount of time, or people still trash talk so much about these causes that end up sometimes people loses the desire to go for it? I don't know what I mean. It's because it's really hard. Sometimes I hear comments of people talking about other organizations. They always try to find, oh, this is a scam, or there's someone trying to make money, or he's just trying to get mad media. And sometimes it could be true, but it was the same back then. And do you think something has changed?
No, it wasn't the same back then because we didn't have social media. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have any of the easy, accessible media outlets that we do now. When we first started, it took us a while to get known, and we had a direct mail campaign, which was really beneficial because through direct mail, we were able to enlighten, millions of Americans about the true horrors of drunken drug driving. So what happened? So actually in the beginning, for the first couple of years, especially since we were making a difference, we were, really saving lives. I think deaths and injuries dropped something like 20% the first 3 years. We had a great deal of support. Unfortunately, what happens in this country, and I'm sure in others, is the media, after a while, they get tired of being good and nice to you. So then they turn around and decide they have to find things wrong.
They have to sell.
Yeah. And so what was beginning to happen is that I was becoming the story and not the issue, which is unfortunately typical, and it just gets real old. And it wasn't the reason I started MAD, wasn't for me to be the story, but for always the issue of drunk driving. So we did have that problem later on after about 3 or 4 years. And we did have media trying to look and find things wrong with MAD, but it took about 3 or 4 years before they, really started trying to check things out. And by the way, they never succeeded. So
no, yeah, it's okay. I usually say these things go away as long as they don't make money. So it's also. Yeah. How was your first day post MAD? Like when you wake up in the morning and you say like you're not.
After I left.
What?
After I left.
After you left.
Actually, it was really, I tell you, in some ways, it was almost like losing my daughter all over again, because by doing MAD, in many ways, I kept her alive. And so once I left, I really had to face the reality that, she wasn't going to be there every day. Yes, in my mind, but not, in the world, so to speak. And so I went through a grieving period, but there was also a tremendous sense of freedom, of just weightlessness, because MAD really was a burden. There's just no nice way of saying it. It was. And I did it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was, the CEO, chairperson of the board. I did the majority of the work in terms of public media, fundraising, all of that. We had staff, but it still relied upon me because I was the one who was known and the one who drew people in. We had hundreds and thousands, actually, of volunteers across the country who did phenomenal jobs in their areas and localities. But when it came to the national scene, it was really kind of me. And so it was, I said to somebody, it's like, God, I can go out and smell the roses, and I can go shopping, and people, well, actually, they did recognize me for a time, but it was really good. It was really good. It took a while, but it was really good. Yeah.
How did your family, other than having to deal with the loss of a person that is pretty much part of core of their family, and you have other children, and you are ex-wife, but there's still family on that side. How did they deal with the fact that they had to deal with that, plus your fight?
Being gone?
Yeah.
I was gone 3 weeks out of the month. I mean, exactly. I was like not home. Carrie was an identical twin. And so her sister, Serena, I think handled it much better than my son, Travis, did. And we had some major issues with Travis. He got involved in drugs and dropped out of school, but he is a thriving father of 5. Good provider, good husband, good father. But we went through, believe me, a long period of time with him where he was in and out of rehab, and I didn't know if he was going to survive seriously. I mean, I really had some questions about his survival. And, that it was almost in some ways like losing another child. And my son, in case you don't know, was a brain injured child because he was run over when he was 4. Yeah. So I already had ongoing health issues with him. So he did not do well with my travel and being gone. My daughter, on the other hand, seemed to do just fine.
Interesting, because I would probably expect the twin daughter. Mm-hmm. Anyway, just me brainstorming.
Well, I mean, she went through, but what I did with Serena is I said, look, if you at any time feel the need to go into counseling for your grief, let me know. And she finally did after about 6 months or so. And she said, Mom, I think I need to see someone. And I set it up, and she did. And I remember talking to the counselor, and she said, I can't tell you obviously about what goes on between your daughter and I, but she said, your daughter is a very strong individual, and she's really doing quite well. So I really wasn't concerned about her.
Let's do a bit of a fast forward between that time and, let's say, a period of time between the moment you had that and the moment you created We Save Lives. Mm-hmm. After being out, you were doing a lot of work and writing and helping, but not actively driving an organization. What made you come back to them?
Interestingly enough, I went to a conference. It was a MAD conference. It was the first one I'd been to in a long time. And I was a consultant at that time for a company that manufactures ignition interlock devices and portable drug testing that you can do for the drivers. And so I was kind of back in it, not in a movement sort of way, but, working in terms of the devices and whatever. And I loved the drug tests. I was a big proponent of those. And I was called aside by a group of NHTSA people, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration people, who said to me, we really miss you. It's not the same since you left. Would you consider coming back and starting something new? because we really need activism. MAD by then, of course, was a bureaucracy, which it is, and not, didn't have the chapters anymore. There were no longer really activists present. And they were focused mainly on ignition interlock devices, which they are. And although they do great victim services, but I mean, their focus had just changed dramatically. So I thought about it, and they talked to me actually that day, and several of them followed up with other conversations with me. And I thought, why not? At that time, distracted driving in this country was really becoming a big issue, but people weren't recognizing it. And drugged driving was becoming a big issue. And that issue I was very focused on, because my son, his brain injury resulted from being run over by a woman on prescription drugs. And I thought, I don't want to just focus on drunk driving. I want to do the 3 Ds, because we don't have a national organization dealing with drugged driving, and we don't have one dealing with distracted. We have little groups, in little areas, but not a national. So, and ironically, not long after that, I too was hit by a distracted driver and broke my back. And so I went, whoa, this really is a problem. Yeah, time to do something. So I started We Save Lives, and I started We Save Lives not to compete with MAD or be anything like MAD. I wouldn't do that again at all, ever. I didn't want to start chapters, even though I had a lot of people come to me and want to start chapters. I wanted it as a partner organization, to partner with other organizations and foundations that were doing something along the same lines that we were, and that shared our mission. And that's what it is. I think we have over 60 partners in this country and some in other countries as well. And we work together, and I'll promote their campaigns and they'll promote ours, and I learn from them and they learn from us. And we have a number of campaigns, as you know. We have we have 2 on distracted driving. One, I love this one, but not while driving. And by the way, did you add that to your mobile device signature? So we ask everybody to add hashtag but not while driving to their mobile device signature.
The one that you send me, the one you have in your signature when you write me, I did not add to mine, but I always pay attention to yours.
Yes, well, you should add it to yours, because that lets everyone know that you don't do this while driving. You don't use your cell phone while driving. And so it's kind of a way to make it socially unacceptable.
Yeah.
We have a Courage to Intervene promise, and that is where we ask people to sign not to not do this, not to not drive drunk, blah, but to intervene when someone that they see someone is going to drive drunk, drugged, or distracted. We have a drug driving campaign going on that we've joined with NHTSA on, that we've been doing actually for a while. And we don't take a position on the legalization of marijuana issue, but we do take a position on driving under the influence of marijuana and other drugs. And our video Reflections from Inside, I mean, that has been seen all over the world numerous times. It's hundreds of millions of viewers, and that is one of our anti-drunk driving campaigns. So
I recommend everyone to watch it, by the way. I watched it myself already a few times, and it's really an eye-opener.
It is. And it's ironic, because I just got contacted the other day by the mother of someone who drove drunk, killed a retired police officer and his wife, and is now serving 15 to 30 years in prison. And she said her son would like to start something in prison. We'll see. But, educating the other inmates or prisoners about the issue of drunk driving. But no, that won awards. I mean, that's timeless. That's a video you can play 10 years from now.
Correct.
And it still has an impact.
Do you believe it? Do you agree with me that a lot of the work you did with MAD and a lot of the activism you have done over time, also your work outside of MAD, has created a bit of a trend, right? A trend, not people creating, but is creating this power that you can do something.
No question about it.
I have one example. It's I don't know if you know about it. It's this Mothers Against Tip-Overs.
Who?
Mothers Against I forgot the name. Against this furniture that falls and is killing children because of this IKEA furniture. So whatever the name is called, I think it's Mothers Against. I think it's Tip-Overs, but I don't remember the name. And they have created a foundation or a group of people, I don't know what is their legal setup, but they have created a group of people, mothers that came together because their children were killed by this furniture you buy, this cheap furniture, disposable type like IKEA, that just falls pretty easily, right? And so it falls on top of their babies, and they just passed them away, unfortunately. And so they have created it. And when I was listening to that on Netflix, just by the name, it sounded like another inspiration coming from like Mad. And so do you also feel it, right?
Oh, I know it. Although
it.
I would not advise people to use the word against in their name anymore. We're an exception to the rule, but usually you should be for something. I know it. I mean, I actually have people send me articles in the old days or whatever, and where somebody would start a movement and they'd say, I want to do what she did, the woman who started MAD. I mean, I was here in Virginia, and I saw a newspaper article, or somebody sent it to me, and there was this black policeman who would go into the schools, and he would talk to the children about drugs, and he had a really cool presentation, and he would show like the glamour of being a pimp or a drug dealer, and then at the end he would bring in a casket, literally, with someone in it, seriously. And so when they interviewed him, he said, well, I want to do what that white woman did from California. And I called him up and I said, well, I happen to be that white woman from California. So if you need some help, I'm here and happy to help, which I did. But I would see, I think there's a anti-gun movement. I can't think of Moms or something. She has said many times, I want to emulate, what Candace did or whatever. So I see it and hear it all the time. And I get phone calls. That's why I'm doing this course, because I'm always, every week, I hear from someone that suffered some kind of an injustice, or they saw something that they felt needed to change. And they want, help or guidance or advice. And so I finally thought, why don't I just, now that you can do these things on Zoom and tapes and all kinds of things that I didn't know about until recently. So I thought, well, why not do this? And I'm an ongoing guest lecturer at Columbia University at the Institute. And so Hatundra, the professor there, and I have been talking about doing it for a while, and I just decided to go ahead and do it. And so I started doing it, and then he saw what I was doing. He said, well, I think we could do this too. Let's do this together. So that's what we're doing. 3 master classes, one on activism and one on building a sustainable movement, and one on kind of the foundation.
Here we go. Yeah. You know what you guys have to look for if you like that.
Yeah.
But I think that let's bring, because people that follows this knows that I don't have a script, right? So I just go with the flow. So never know where it goes. A bit of the social media issue, and we have the generation social media, and this let's take this, what happened in the United States few weeks ago with George Floyd, where there is a point in time where people are on the streets, they don't know anymore what they are fighting for. Mm-hmm. They're just making noise and using that as an excuse for something else. Mm-hmm. Do you also think that this also happens in activism, like over time, because of the social media and the need of branding and exposure, it became a little bit less acting on real things, and it became a bit more show off?
I couldn't agree with you more. And not only that, and I've said this on my Twitter, knee-jerk reactions to the current crisis do not make a difference. Mm-hmm. It takes change, and it takes people working together with thought and strategy, goals, etc., which is one of the reasons why I'm doing the courses, because I've become so frustrated, like with the Me Too movement, which is,
all over the place.
Yeah, and people just posting their stories, and then what? I mean, I've watched this.
There's no consequence. It's just
yeah, and the same with the anti-gun movement. God love them. Yeah. Everybody gets up and marches, and I, I'm right there with them. But then what? Change doesn't. Yeah, and so I've watched it, and I thought, and when I go in and look at it or talk to them, I realize I know why it's not working, and so I just thought, these are all good things that need to happen, but you've got no leadership in any of these groups, or 400 leaders and nobody, and then infighting, which I've observed, and everybody has a different wish. And, now one group wants to defund the police and another group wants to disband the police and this is what you deal with. In my day, I feel like my parents, I was the leader. That was it. It's kind of what worked. And, and everybody respected that and worked with me. And when that ended, so did the impact, actually. These movements are missing so much. So that's like my third master class, is how to build a sustainable movement, that actually makes change. That's long-term change, not just, let's just do this today and stop this procedure and policy and this police. Change needs to happen, no question about it, but it has to be real change that's going to benefit everyone.
And don't you also think that sometimes what happens is that we try to tackle a lot of things in parallel? So a lot of people want to do something, and instead of trying to join groups where they can make a difference and they have common ground, everyone wants to create something. Exactly. And I'm talking about myself that created this podcast, but this is not the same, right? It's a podcast. I'm talking, but I think we tend to want to be the leader. Everyone wants to be the leader in the face of the media, and I'm driving, and we forget that to get something, you don't have to be creating. You can just join something.
And what happens is no one really is the leader. The first thing I tell people when they contact me about a particular issue is I'll say, well, is there anyone out there doing something like this? Yeah. Have you looked? And if they say no, I go home and get off the phone and go do a search and find what groups and organizations that carry the mission that coincides with your mission, and then call me back and we'll talk. And so if they do, and by the way, this is not an invitation for people to do this anymore because they don't have time, and you can sign up for my course, but when they do, I'll say, okay, so tell me what you saw that they're doing. And they'll say, oh, well, this. And then I'll say, well, how does that work with, oh, it doesn't. I want to do this. It's totally different. And by the way, most of the time it's not. Yeah. And I'll say, well, then why don't you go back to them, tell them your idea, and see if they'll work with you on this new program or campaign. And I can't tell you, I don't think anybody's ever done it. No, they've just got to start their own. They really want to do it. And I'm like, and a lot of times they don't succeed and it doesn't go well. And I go, do you realize you're competing with established organizations for funds and credibility? And these groups are already making a difference. It's just anyway. I have a thing that I'm putting up called, we're in the age of activism, and it goes on from there about what's successful and what isn't. But we really are. We're in the age of activism. Big deal. If it doesn't make a difference.
Show fireworks. A lot of fireworks.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the generations, I think the younger generations, and I have another question to you about how do you see that also with the Save Lives. But I see in the younger generations, we tend to have a lot of energy to start with. And if I give you this example, this podcast, let's start with my example. In the beginning, I asked for volunteers, and I got like dozens of people. They fade away after a month and a half. So I started myself with a bunch of volunteers, and I'm now myself again, because no one wants to effectively have to do a lot. Everyone likes to throw ideas, but no one likes to really have to put the effort to get it done. So, and of course I'm generalizing, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people also follows it through. But this is also one issue I see, and do you see the same way? It's like people start but they just lose their energy very quickly, as long as they don't see results right away, right? And this is not just with activism, by the way.
That's sort of true. But another reason that volunteers don't stick around is because there isn't someone telling them what to do and following through.
My fault.
And so, So the first thing that we did when I started MAD years ago is we brought an intern on who actually developed, she was I think a freshman in college or something, who actually developed our volunteer program. So she was there to give them direction, to follow through, to make brochures and all of that. And we did the same with our victims program. So the first thing that I would tell people is you need to learn how to delegate, and you need to find someone that's willing to kind of take the helm. And then you need to work closely with them to make sure that the work gets done and they know what's going on and they get the appropriate praise, etc. So I think that's, to be honest with you, I think that's what happens in the majority of cases with volunteers. And yes, it's true, some of them are very enthused and will come on board and then lose enthusiasm, especially if they don't see that you're making an immediate difference. But you have to have a clear-cut reason for them to be there. You know, why are you here? What is it you want to see us do, the podcast do, or whatever? And how do you want to help us do that? And so they have to be clear in their minds of what their goal is. And is it the same as your goal, or do they just want to get involved because they're bored and have nothing else to do? You know, so yeah, could be too. Which is why a lot of nonprofits now, I just joined a board of another organization because they need some help. And, you know, they usually will give you forms to fill out, you know, like what are your interests? What do you see? How long can you stay? How much time can you give? You know.
Yeah. I feel that the activism and these organizations in the United States, and I've spent some time, I think about 2 years in the United States, and I've been in other places also in Europe. But I feel the activism is more developed as a structural thing in the United States than in other countries. And a few months ago, I was talking to someone from the Portuguese government, and they were telling me, because lobbying in the United States is something you can do without making sound like a crime. In Portugal, is considered to be a crime and influencing and stuff like that. Do you think is also one of the big reasons?
Well, I've often said I couldn't have started MAD in any other country and made it the success that it was in this country because of we have so much freedom. I did go, though, to other countries, and I did work with their parliaments, for example, on raising the drinking age to 21. I was brought over to Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, and Britain. And they do have a different system of government, but I was brought over to lobby their parliaments, or whatever you want to call them, on why they should raise the drinking age to 21. I don't think it was successful, and I don't know because the other organizations just brought me over to support them, and I don't know whatever happened in the long run. But I think, and nonprofits hate to use the term lobby, we like to use the term advocate, because we advocate for change, we advocate, we educate our legislators. But it is true that you can change laws here probably much easier than you can, I think, in other countries.
Yeah, interesting.
But it isn't just, laws aren't, there's a lot of, I'm doing another podcast in a couple of weeks with a group of NBA students, I think, who want to change the laws around racism, et cetera. And laws can be important and they can be valuable, especially with drunk driving, because people didn't realize it was a crime. And so we had to do that first. We had to show it was a crime and then make it a serious crime before we could change attitudes. But laws aren't the end all. There's things like education. I belong to, after I left MAD, I was on the board of a group called the Foundation for Mid-East Communication. It was prominent Arabs and Jews, and I'm Arab. And we had what we called dialogue groups, which I found fascinating. And we would bring together Arabs and Jews. We had a professional facilitator, it was an Israeli, and talk about the issues to each other. It was really amazing. And it became so successful during its short time period, short life. And there were those of us who were on the board were all very prominent, well-known Jews and Arabs in this country. We would get invitations from schools to come in. And so we would take in an Arab and a Jew representative of each side, and they would go in and in a civilized, normal tone of voice would talk about what their differences were and what their similarities were. And it was amazing how the students reacted. Number one, they were completely floored that they weren't killing each other, because that's what they see in the media.
Yeah.
And two, they were amazed at the similarities and the things they found in common and the way they could talk about the issues where you could see both sides. And we need to see a lot more of that in this country, as far as I'm concerned. But that had nothing to do with legislation, yet it had an impact in terms of changing people's minds about the issues.
How do you see the role of how do you see the role of media, not social media, but the journalists and the networks? I'm not completely clear about how does that work in the United States, but I can tell you in Portugal, or I can tell you in Netherlands or Denmark, they don't necessarily help these kind of cases. That they are looking much more for the clickbait, right? The thing that sell the advertisement. Is that the same in the United States, or there is a change of mindset?
No, I think you're right. And I will tell you that when I started MAD, and I still to this day will thank the media for helping us get off the ground and create the change and notifying people there was a problem and interviewing victims, etc. I wouldn't give 2 cents for what they do now. We have to do it ourselves, basically. And it is through social media, etc. And half the time the media is biased, which when I started MAD, I truly don't remember that kind of bias that I see now. To me, they had really good investigative journalism, which they don't anymore. And it was a whole different ball game. And now I think people rely on, what do they call, alternative media? Like I read like Political or BuzzFeed or other. I don't do hardly any mainstream at all anymore. In fact, I don't think I do it at all. I go to different sources and I usually double check and, do all kinds of Google searches to make sure it's accurate, or I go to the organization maybe that's dealing with this particular issue and I see what they have to say about it. I think the media has just sort of made themselves irrelevant, frankly.
So, yesterday I was watching this, The Patriotic Act on Netflix with Hassan Minhaj, this Indian descendant American. He has a kind of a stand-up comedy show where, I don't know if you know it, where he talks about, it's called The Patriotic Act on Netflix. And so he was talking about lawmakers in the United States, and he made a statement saying, while we always focus, like if you talk about NBA, you say we will usually focus on LA Lakers, and no one talks about the whatever Mercury Nets in my village. While in lawmakers, a lot of the A leagues are in media, but the ones that make really change in laws and make impacts on the districts and whatever are those ones that we don't talk so much, and those sometimes the frustrated ones that don't get to the A leagues, and they are defining the rules of the people and the way they live. Is that really the case, or is just a comedian trying to make fun of it?
No, let me give you an example. I came across an article, and of course I've worked a lot with law enforcement, so I usually am current with them, or they are friends with me on Facebook or whatever, so I see what they're doing. But I was seeing all these articles about the Black people that have been killed by police, and they're really coming out of the woodwork because they're finding, 6 months ago this happened, or 3 years ago, or whatever. And so you're seeing a lot of it. And I wasn't seeing anything about law enforcement except the bad things they were doing. And I came across an article that showed police at a funeral for their fellow cops, 12 of which had been killed in these protests. And I thought, well, gee, I didn't see that anywhere in the media. I saw one article about a sheriff that was actually ambushed in San Diego, and it lasted for all of 5 minutes, on the website, and it was gone. And I went, so I posted this on my Twitter and thanked them for their service. And the response I got was just unbelievable. But I mean, it was good. It was, I think, retweeted 300 or 400 times. But I thought, and it wasn't that I was taking a side. I just felt like there should be some balance here. And if we're going to talk about what's happening in this community, then we should also talk about what's happening in this community,
Correct.
And so you can see that, the police over here are being shot and killed and ambushed and, yeah. and so it's not like one is better than the other, but I just felt the media wasn't giving balance here. So yes, I think your friend is right. And so what happens is everybody looks and they think all cops are bad. And they think that that's all they do is run around shooting minorities. And that is absolutely not true. But I also want to do away with the word minorities. I've decided we should no longer use the word minorities.
but you know, I made a post in my Facebook a few weeks ago that got some people to get upset with me because I said what happened to George Floyd is absolutely unacceptable, and there's nothing to defend on that. That's fine. The speech that the church, I forgot his name, the pastor in the church when during the memorial of George Floyd is as unacceptable because he is talking about they and we. So that for me is creating the same gap and the same opening
exactly.
up. That we cannot look at it as a good thing. It is a bad thing.
That's right. I mean, it's going to be interesting when I talk to these young people about the laws and stuff, because the first thing I want to ask them is, do you have any police that you're interviewing too?
Yeah.
So you can find out. And see, I go on ride-alongs with the police. So, I see a whole different side here, but it's like, it's so we're going to end this over here, but we're still going to have this problem over here. So you can't end this over here. If you no, but you're absolutely right. And that's interesting. I think if I'd seen your post, I probably would have shared it. It should be, it's like when I started MAD and truly not knowing anything, I said to somebody, well, who would oppose this? Oh my God. They said the alcohol industry, ACLU, blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, okay, let's bring them all together. And we didn't have an office then. And so everybody said, no, you don't bring them together. No. And I said, but I want to know why they would not go along with what we want to do. I want to understand this. I want to learn. Oh, no, you can't do this. This is lobbyists and all telling me this. Well, I did it anyway. We met in the back of a church and because we didn't have offices. And so we sat down and I said, okay, this is the bills that I would like to get introduced and passed. Can you tell me what problems you'll have with them? We have law enforcement there, ACLU, alcohol industry, insurance companies. I can't remember who all else. And I said, let me know what problems you have so we can see if there's a way to compromise. I'm big on compromise. And nobody said anything. And now, I mean, seriously. And so when they left, I heard somebody tell me the ACLU said, oh, we're not going to touch her with a 10-foot pole. Are you kidding me? And the alcohol industry said, as long as you're not going to affect our business, which we didn't until we went for nickel a drink, and then they did oppose us. But and I thought, well, okay, now I know, who stands where. I actually had more opposition from the legislators because they drank and drove than I did from any organized organizations, I know
Heineken is a Dutch brand, right? And they have no interest of people driving drunk. It's like this. Anyway, it's a different story. If we take We Save Lives, and if we take MAD, and if we pick the time in between, if you have to choose one moment that somehow you could say that was like an inspiring moment for me in between those two inspiring groups, what would be?
I can't. That's a long period of time.
I'm not talking about time here. I'm not talking about time.
We're talking about many years, and I can't remember back that far. But I'll tell you, probably writing the book gave me such an insight into grief and grieving and mourning that if I had any aha moments, it would be while researching and writing the book, because we interviewed a number of people from different types of grief, partner grief, suicide, etc. And it was, really kind of a fascinating process, but also that's when I realized, I really did, that there is no timeline to grief. Mm-hmm. That it is a lifetime process, and that's okay. You don't need to worry and that there are no 5 stages as of dying. People get that all confused. And I think that was probably kind of my aha phase, If
most of the people with your track record and the things you have done to change people's lives, they would have pick a time and they would say, that's enough, I gotta rest. And you have grandchildren, you have family, but you don't, at least the perception.
Oh, if I won the lottery, I would.
Yeah, okay. So
seriously, I'd be gone. If I won the lottery, I have a mantra and everybody laughs because I always go, if I win the lottery. If I won the lottery, I'd want to do my master classes. And I really do want to do those. And then I would, do that and that would be it.
But you did not win the lottery?
And I buy lottery tickets. Seriously. I mean, it's like, unfortunately, I still need to work. And so I do, and I work in a movement that I care a lot about. And, but if I won the lottery and I didn't have to work, I would do my master classes no matter what. And then I would do other things.
Do you think if your movements with MAD would have been today, the impact of that would have been even greater?
Oh, if I'd started it today?
Yeah.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Oh, no, there would be no impact.
No, it will be just.
No. I mean, show me one organization really that has started in recent years that's had any kind of a major impact. Seriously. I mean, I changed the culture of a nation, I mean, I say that with no humility whatsoever because it's true. It's been acknowledged. I just had it acknowledged the other day by somebody who was interviewing 30 different movements around the world, and I came out right on top. And I mean, it's reality. I did. You show me anything that's been done similar to that in recent years. And
it's too much information, right? It just fades away.
You're right. I think you're absolutely, it's way too much. There's too many competing things, too much going on. I mean, we really had the focus of the media for at least 3 or 4 years, seriously, where it was like, oh my God, they found an issue. And what was interesting is many of them drank and drove, but, so it took me a while to get them to come around, but seriously. And we had, women, God, coming out of the woodwork, God love them, whose children had died and springing forth in different states that were articulate spokespeople and making a difference. And so it was sort of like a domino effect, that went around the country. Well, I haven't seen that. I have not seen that since. I haven't.
Candace, we're coming to an end of our time. And I always like to ask my guests to leave one message that people takes home, not as not just an inspiration, but rather something to think of, right? Because my target here is to people to listen and get inspiration, but also to try to do something with it. And I know that you have your master classes, and I truly recommend everyone that likes these things to join. But if you would have to say something to someone listening to us that is willing to do something, but it doesn't know how, or doesn't know when, and what is needed, what would be your quick advice for that, or your quick message?
Well, it's hard. One is you don't have to tolerate injustice. You can, in fact, do something about it. And I think the other is you just really have to be committed. So if you want to create change, you just have to be committed to create change. And there is a way to do it. There's always a way to do it. I don't listen to people, and I'm saying I don't. The words I don't. I can't stand the words I can't, or it won't, or I tried, but I just not in my vocabulary, because if I can do it, anybody can. So.
Thank you very much for your time. It's a fantastic conversation. Hope people that listen gets the same as I get out of it. It's really inspiring.
That was sweet. So let's talk again in the future and talk about what you want to do. Now that we're getting out of this, well, we'll never get out of this completely.
We'll get out of this. I think so.
We'll see.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Do I leave the studio? Bye.